In 1869, in New York City, Thomas Edison was sleeping in a borrowed room near the machines at Samuel Law's Gold Indicator Company, the kind of place where a young man could disappear without anybody caring. He was 22 years old, half-deaf, low on money, and thin from living too close to the edge. Men walked past him because there was nothing to notice yet, no title, reputation, or reason to stop. He looked like one more tired operator trying to stay useful in a city that respected results and had no patience for struggle. The room was cramped, the work was noisy, and Edison was easy to miss. But some quiet moments are not small at all. Some are only quiet because nobody knows what they are looking at yet. Stay with this beginning, because the part people overlook is usually the part that explains everything. Go back to February 11th, 1847. Edison was born in Milan, Ohio, to Sam Edison and Nancy Edison, and the family later moved to Port Huron, Michigan in 1854 when his father went looking for better luck and steadier work in the lumber trade. Home was not a place of comfort as much as a place of pressure. Money moved in and out. Stability never fully settled in. Nothing about his early life felt secure enough to make a boy relaxed. That matters because when a child grows up around uncertainty, he learns early that safety does not just appear. You either build it or you spend your life waiting for it. Edison was not the kind of boy who fit neatly into school. He was restless, curious, distracted by questions that other people did not have time for. One teacher called him addled, which in plain terms meant slow, mixed up, not worth much in a classroom. His mother heard that and pulled him out. Nancy Edison had once been a teacher herself, and she refused to let one small room decide what her son was. She taught him at home and gave him space to read, test things, and ask questions that had no easy answer. That sounds simple, but it was not. When someone steps in and says, "I see more in you than the world does," that can hold a life together. It also leaves a mark. Edison learned two things early. First, people can be badly wrong about you. Second, proving them wrong takes longer than you wanted to. He started working young because the family needed money, not because he was chasing some grand dream. In 1859, when he was about 12, he sold newspapers and candy on the Grand Trunk Railroad line between Port Huron and Detroit. He worked around noise, motion, smoke, and adults who expected him to earn his place. This was not the kind of childhood that lets a boy wait to discover himself later. He had to become useful early. But even there, something deeper kept showing up. In the baggage car, between the papers and the candy, he set up a small chemistry lab. He also started a paper called the Grand Trunk Herald, which is often described as the first newspaper printed on a moving train. That is the kind of detail people like because it sounds colorful, but underneath it was something more important. Edison was not just trying to make money, he was trying to control a corner of the world with his own hands. He wanted to test things, build things, publish things, make systems move. Then one of his experiments caused a fire in the baggage car, and that little lab was gone. Around that same period, he lost most of his hearing. The exact cause has long been debated, but the result was clear. By his early teens, sound was leaving him. That loss made him more alone than he already was. He could not move through the world as easily as other people did, and he knew it. A hard beginning does not always arrive as one big tragedy. Sometimes it arrives in smaller ways. A bad label at school, a family that cannot fully relax, work before childhood is finished, a body that starts failing you before your life has even started. That kind of pressure does something to a person. It can make you bitter, it can make you give up, or it can make you decide that the only way to stay safe is to become so useful that the world has to make room for you. The first real pull came through the railroad and the telegraph. In 1862, still a teenager, Edison helped save a 3-year-old boy from a boxcar rolling toward him on the tracks. The boy's father, J.U. Mackenzie, was so grateful that he taught Edison railroad telegraphy. That changed the shape of his life. Telegraphy was not just a trade, it was a way into something larger. It showed him that messages could move faster than people, that invisible force could travel over wire, that a system built by human hands could connect distance, money, urgency, and power. For a young man who had grown up around instability, that mattered. Here was something built on order. Here was a network. Here was proof that the world, for all its chaos, could be made to respond if you understood how it worked. He took a telegraph job in Port Huron that winter, and from 1863 through 1867, he moved from city to city, taking whatever telegraph work he could get. The work was real but small. He was not in charge, he was not admired. He was one more operator on night shifts and in cramped offices, handling signals, fixing problems, staying awake, and trying to not get replaced. He was fired from some jobs. He was known for experimenting too much and sleeping too little. He was smart but not smooth, useful but not easy. Men like that are often tolerated before they are respected. In other words, Edison was learning his craft in the least flattering way possible. No applause or big entrance, just repetition, mistakes, observation, and the daily insult of being treated like a small part in somebody else's machine. That part of the story matters because many people imagine ambition as confidence. A lot of the time, it isn't. A lot of the time, it's irritating. It's the private feeling that you can see more than your role allows, and the growing anger of having to stand still while everybody around you assumes this is as far as you go. Edison carried that feeling with him. He kept studying equipment, kept testing ideas, kept taking apart the logic behind the systems he worked inside. He was not winning yet, he was absorbed. He was not building a company yet, he was learning what companies depended on. In 1868, he moved to Boston and worked in the Western Union office. Boston gave him more access, more machinery, more problems to solve, but not instant status. He was still a young operator with odd habits and bigger thoughts than his position justified. He worked his shifts, then turned back to invention. That same period brought one of the most important lessons of his early life. In June 1869, his first patented invention, the electric vote recorder, was rejected by politicians who did not want a faster voting system. They liked delay because delay gave them room to bargain. Edison learned something hard and lasting from that failure. A clever machine means nothing if nobody wants it. That may sound obvious now, but for a young inventor, it was a brutal lesson. He had built something that worked, and the world still said no. That kind of rejection can save a person if he listens to it. Edison did. He decided he would stop wasting time on ideas people wouldn't use. That was a quiet shift, but a major one. He was no longer just chasing invention. He was beginning to think about demand, usefulness, scale, and systems that fit real life. In plain terms, he was getting sharper, not grander, sharper. Then, in the middle of 1869, he moved to New York City. He arrived with little money and no guaranteed future. Franklin Pope, a friend, let him sleep in that room near the gold indicator machines. Then one day, a machine broke down, and Edison fixed it. That repair got him hired to manage and improve the stock printers. It was a small opening, but it was the kind that changes a man's posture. For the first time, the things he noticed, the things other people barely saw him doing, started turning into leverage. Not successful yet, but movement. The city still did not know his name. Most people still wouldn't have looked twice at him. Yet under the surface, something had changed. The boy called Addled, the train vendor with chemicals in the baggage car, the half-deaf operator drifting from job to job, was no longer only surviving. He was starting to understand a truth that would drive the rest of his life. If the world runs on systems, then the person who learns to improve those systems never stays small for long.
The city had finally given him a narrow opening, and Thomas Edison moved through it fast. After fixing the stock printer at the Gold Indicator Company in New York in 1869, he was put in charge of the machines, and before long he designed an improved universal stock printer that brought him more money than he had ever seen before. about $40,000 for the rights. For a young man who had spent years drifting from telegraph office to telegraph office, that kind of money was more than relief. It was proof. It told him that the things he noticed, the things other people barely respected, could be turned into something real. Still, money has a way of changing pressure, not removing it. Once he had a little room to move, he had to decide whether he wanted a safer life or a bigger one. He chose bigger. He moved to Newark, New Jersey, built up small shops, hired machinists, and threw himself into telegraph work that was far more demanding than the boy selling candy on trains could have imagined. He was still young, still rough around the edges, still carrying that old habit of working past reason, but now he was learning the part that separates a clever man from a powerful one. He was learning how to turn ideas into production, how to keep men working, how to deal with suppliers, how to hold investors' attention, and how to stay alive when every delay cost money. A lot of people dream better than they build. Edison was starting to build. He pushed hard into telegraph inventions because that was the world he knew best. He improved stock tickers, printers, and telegraph devices, and he became deeply involved in automatic telegraphy, which was one more step in his growing interest in speed, efficiency, and systems that could do more work with less waste. He was no longer only asking whether something worked, he was asking whether it worked better, faster, cheaper, and on a scale that mattered. That is where ambition starts getting serious. It stops being about proving you are smart and starts becoming about building something that can survive outside your head. By the early 1870s, he had real contracts, real employees, real expectations, and no clean way to step back. He married Mary Stilwell in December 1871. She was 16, he was 24. She had worked in one of his shops. Their life began while he was already tied to the wheel of invention and business, and that wheel was not slowing down for anybody. Some people rise in a way that looks smooth from the outside. Edison's rise had sparks flying off it from the start. The workdays ran long, the pressure kept growing, he drove himself hard, and he expected other people to keep up. That gets results for a while, but it also leaves marks, especially at home. By 1874, he had developed the quadruplex telegraph, a system that could send multiple messages over one wire at the same time. And that mattered because it gave powerful companies like Western Union a way to increase capacity without laying whole new lines. It was exactly the kind of invention Edison had trained himself to value since that failed vote recorder in Boston. Useful, commercial, built for the world as it was, not for the world he wished it would be. The money and attention that came from work like that pushed him higher, but it also changed how people looked at him. He was no longer just a strange telegraph operator with a habit of staying up all night. He was becoming the kind of man investors listened to, the kind newspapers watched, the kind competitors had to track. That sounds like comfort, but it was the opposite. Once the world starts expecting things from you, every new promise becomes a debt. Every success raises the price of the next attempt. Anyone who has ever turned a small win into a bigger life knows that feeling. At first, progress gives you hope. Then it gives you weight. In 1876, at age 28, Edison made one of the most important moves of his life when he opened the laboratory at Menlo Park, New Jersey. Menlo Park was more than a building. It was a new way of working. He brought the lab and machine shop together and built a place where ideas could be tested, adjusted, rebuilt, and pushed toward market with unusual speed. People later called it an invention factory, and that name fits because Edison was no longer acting like a lone tinkerer in a corner. He was building a system for invention itself. Menlo Park gave him room, tools, workers, and a kind of control he had been chasing since boyhood. It also gave him something dangerous, the ability to promise more. Once you create a place designed to produce breakthroughs, the world begins waiting for one. The early results only raised the temperature. In 1877, Menlo Park produced the phonograph, the first machine that could record sound and play it back. That invention changed Edison's reputation almost overnight. Crowds were fascinated by it. Newspapers loved it. The same man who had once looked easy to ignore was now being called the Wizard of Menlo Park. It was a powerful nickname, but nicknames can be traps. The moment people decide you are a wizard, they stop seeing the sweat, the failed trials, the dead ends, the money burning in the background, and the strain on the people close to you. They only see the magic. Edison understood how to use that attention, but he also fed it. He liked momentum. He liked public excitement. He liked being at the center of what came next. Yet the more famous he became, the less room he had to stumble in public. That is a truth a lot of people learn too late. Getting noticed feels like freedom until you realize people are now counting on you to stay impressive. The focus soon turned to electric light, and this is where the story began to get heavier than it looked. Edison did not just want a better lamp. Plenty of people had already been chasing electric light in one form or another. What he wanted was bigger and harder. He wanted a full system that could replace gaslight in homes, businesses, and streets. That meant lamps, generators, wiring, meters, distribution, switches, and a way to make the whole thing safe and practical for ordinary use.
It was one thing to impress people with a machine that could talk back. It was another thing to challenge an entire lighting industry and claim you could build the future in its place. In 1878, with backing from investors, he formed the Edison Electric Light Company and went public with that ambition. The promise was huge. The burden was bigger. Once he tied his name to electric light, he was no longer just experimenting in peace. He was racing a clock made of money, reputation, and public doubt. Inside Menlo Park, the work became brutal. Edison and his team, the men around him often called muckers, kept testing materials for filaments and pushing through long stretches of failure. He liked long hours and demanded long hours. He treated failed experiments as part of the process, and in fairness, that mindset helped him get farther than men who quit too soon. But determination has a dark side when it becomes the whole atmosphere of a place. Sleep gets thinner, tempers get shorter, home starts to feel farther away. Mary and the children were there in his life, but Menlo Park was becoming the center of his real attention. He kept driving forward because that is what had always protected him. Work had carried him out of childhood shame, out of poverty, out of being the half-heard boy nobody fully trusted. It had become the way he answered doubt. The problem is that the same habit that saves you in one season can start costing you in the next. A man can build his life with obsession and still lose pieces of himself to it. Outside the lab, the pressure stayed close. Investors wanted progress. The press wanted a story. Competitors were not standing still. Gas companies had no reason to welcome him. Other electrical thinkers were moving on their own paths. Even people who believed in Edison often believed in the public version of him more than the real one. They believed in the wizard, the machine of constant breakthroughs, the man who could simply will the next invention into existence. That image helped him raise support, but it also made every delay feel more dangerous. If a test failed, it was not just a private failure anymore. It echoed, it cost money, it weakened confidence. Edison kept talking in public with boldness because boldness was useful, but inside the work there were plenty of reasons to worry. Practical electric light was proving harder, slower, and more expensive than excitement made it seem. Every little gain still sat on top of a larger question. Could he actually make this system work well enough, cheaply enough, and safely enough to change daily life? Or had he promised something too big even for him? By now, he had come a long way from the young operator sleeping near borrowed machines in New York. He had money, shops, patents, workers, investors, headlines, and a laboratory that changed what invention itself could look like. He had earned real confidence, the kind that comes from surviving enough hard seasons to trust your own hands. Yet something under the surface had started to shift. The rise was real, but it no longer felt clean. Too much now depended on a problem that had not fully given way. Too many people were waiting. Too much of Edison's name was wrapped around a promise that still flickered more than it held. And when a man builds upward that fast, with that much pressure resting on one unfinished idea, the distance between momentum and collapse gets smaller than it looks. Then the work finally turned. After all the long nights at Menlo Park, after all the burned filaments and failed trials, Edison and his team reached a practical incandescent lamp in 1879, and in December that year, the Menlo Park laboratory was lit in a public demonstration that made people stop doubting and start paying attention. It was the shift he had been chasing, but it did not arrive like peace. It arrived like a door opening onto a harder road. A working lamp was one thing. A whole electrical system that homes and businesses could trust was something else entirely. And Edison knew that better than anyone. He had learned that lesson years earlier when the vote recorder failed in Boston. A machine that works is not enough. It has to fit real life. So he pushed past the applause and went straight back to the larger problem. Generators, wires, meters, stations, distribution, every part of the chain that would have to hold together if electric light was going to become a business instead of a stunt. That was the moment everything changed, because from there on, he was no longer chasing an invention. He was trying to build an industry. The setback came from the size of that promise. Building electric light for the public cost money at a level that could crush a man, and it demanded patience from investors and workers at the same time. The technical problems did not vanish because one lamp stayed lit. The whole system had to be safe, steady, and practical, and every weak point carried the risk of embarrassment, financial loss, or failure in public. Edison was already famous enough by then that failure would not have stayed private. It would have spread. The pressure closed in from all sides. Gaslight was still established. Competitors kept moving. Expectations rose faster than the work itself. At home, the strain of his life did not soften. He had married Mary Stilwell back in 1871, but his habits had never become gentle. He kept hours that wore people down. He pushed because pushing was what had always carried him forward, from the boy called slow to the railroad seller to the operator who slept near borrowed machines. That is one of the harder truths in any life. The habit that rescues you early can start taking from you later. Edison did not give speeches about pressure. He worked through it. He stayed with the system and kept forcing it toward usefulness, even while the cost, the scrutiny, and the risk got heavier. What he did next showed the clearest part of his character. He organized, he tested, he expanded the system piece by piece until it could move outside the lab and into the street. In September 1882, the Pearl Street station in Lower Manhattan began supplying electricity to paying customers in a 1 square mile area. That mattered more than the lamp itself because it proved he was right about the real prize. The future was never just the bulb. The future was delivery. It was power on demand. It was electricity treated like a public service instead of a curiosity. That kind of progress can look clean when people tell it years later, though in the moment it was still unstable, still expensive, and still under attack. Edison had built momentum, yet the ground under him never stopped moving. The electrical business around him had grown into separate companies, different operations, different responsibilities, all carrying his name and all needing stronger structure than one man's drive could provide. Competition sharpened too, especially as George Westinghouse and alternating current gained ground. The argument over current was technical, financial, and public at once, and it put even more strain on Edison's side of the business. He had come too far to step away, so once again his answer was action. He kept building factories, equipment, patents, and systems, and the business was brought together more tightly. In 1889, those electrical interests were consolidated into Edison General Electric Company. It was a major step forward, though it also showed something he had been moving toward for years without fully stopping to admit it. The work had grown beyond the shape of one inventor's hands. That could have been the point where everything finally settled, but instead it brought the last hard turn. Money pressure and industrial competition kept tightening, and in 1892, Edison General Electric merged with Thomson Houston to form General Electric. That is the part people flattened when they tell the story too quickly. They say Thomas Edison created General Electric, and there is truth in that, but only if you understand what that really means. He did not sit alone in a room and dream a giant company into existence. He built the base that made it possible. He created the laboratories, the patents, the lighting system, the commercial push, and the electrical network that helped turn scattered invention into a working industry. Then, business forces bigger than one man's will helped shape that industry into General Electric. The outcome was enormous. GE became one of the great American companies, and Edison's struggle sits inside its foundation, even if the final company was larger, more structured, and less personal than the world he had first built. That is often how real success looks. You carry an idea as far as one life can carry it, and then the world takes it into forms you no longer fully control. When you place that ending beside the beginning, the distance is hard to ignore. The half-deaf young man sleeping in a borrowed room in New York, the one men passed without stopping, helped lay the groundwork for the company that would help power the modern age. He came from a house where money was never steady, from a schoolroom where he was judged too quickly, from years of doing low-level work while watching more than people realized. He carried all of that, the hurt, the restlessness, the need to be useful, the refusal to stay small. It cost him plenty. Obsession always sends a bill. Still, what set him apart was simple. He kept going long enough to turn private frustration into public infrastructure. He made himself valuable by making systems people could rely on. And in the end, the man nobody noticed built something the world could not ignore.